For the live stream, we were not yet ready because I messed it up. So I didn't have anything really important to say. Welcome here, everybody. And I'm very happy that we have this occasion to reach out via live stream because so many people registered from places who would not have made it here. We also have some people from the panel joining us on live stream. The reason why we're having it is that 10 years ago, a terrible attack with chemical weapons happened in Syria. In Ghouta, more than 1,000 people died by the use of sarin gas. And we had chemical weapons used before, we had it afterwards. And therefore, I'm very happy that today we're opening a discussion on a possible way for justice, for accountability for this. So thank you very much, Petra. Former diplomat from the Netherlands, former senator, human rights activist, and specialized on Syria and Egypt. You will come here and introduce maybe the rest of our distinguished experts. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bente. And I will take a seat. And I already see the panelists, Catherine and Lubna, on screen. You will meet them later as well. It's wonderful to be here. For me, Syria is an issue. It's not an issue. It's actually something. Every single day when I walk into my living room, I see a painting. And it's a painting by Ahmed Mualla. And you see a figure carrying a smaller figure. And my guests always say different things. They say Jesus and Maria. And then I tell them, no, it's actually a human being carrying another human being. And this is a painting that was made for a special exhibition in 2001, I think, for the International Committee for the Red Cross at an exhibition of women at war. And at that time, I was a diplomat in Syria. And when I say Syria is an issue, I don't like the word, but ever since I've worked in Syria, I realize how close we're all together. At that time, we were working on international humanitarian law, and we used this exhibition to create attention. And I remember vividly sitting in a room at Damascus University with Professor Shukri, who was the international humanitarian law expert in Syria, and he called out the Syrian officials, like, as long as you're not becoming part of the Rome Statute, if you're not becoming part of the International Criminal Court, we will not be able to hold justice and accountable the perpetrators of violence against Syrians, such as the Israelis. This was very often the argument we could use. Little did we know that 20-odd years later, we would be here in this room, talking in a way about the similar issues. How can we use international law to protect Syrians? And how can we deal with the fact that many, many Syrians, Syrian activists, Syrian human rights activists, Syrian lawyers tell the international community, well, apparently international law protects some, but doesn't protect others. And I think this is why we're here as well. 10 years later, after the gross atrocities committed by the regime, I will use the word regime, maybe the correct word would be authorities, but I am not completely objective here on this panel, so regime. And we've seen that even though they declared that chemical weapons were out of the country, we know that they were lying. And of course, we also know that it's not only the regime, there are also other groups using chemical weapons to attack Syrians. So why are we here, indeed? How can international law protect Syrians? And how can we find justice for the victims and survivors of these chemical attacks? And indeed, as Bente already said, we will discuss this amazing initiative that has been taken that will address the issue of perpetrators being out there, free, while victims and survivors have to deal with the consequences of the chemical attacks every single second of their life. Last Thursday, I didn't really know this, but now because I dove into it, it was the International Day to commemorate all victims of chemical warfare. So a well-chosen day to announce a new treaty-based court which could put on trial alleged users of banned toxic agents worldwide. And this initiative was taken on by a large group of Syrian human rights activists, of civil society activists, of international legal experts. And this evening we will delve into what does this actually mean? How can we bring justice and accountability for all those Syrians who have suffered from these chemical weapons and who are still suffering? And again, when I use the word suffering and victims and survivors, I know that people have multi-layered identities, because I can also see the resilience and the courage. So this is something I think today we have to pay attention to as well. So I would very much like to introduce our first speaker. Well, Ibrahim Olabi is sitting on the front row. Allow me to say a few words about you. You're a barrister, you're an international law expert. You're a specialist on the Middle East and legal issues in the Middle East. You're working in a legal team together with the Netherlands government on the case against Syria and their breaches of the Torture Convention. I heard you say in some podcasts that you're working also like 50% on Syria, 50% on Ukraine. May I say that if we had intervened in 2013, the history would have gone differently also for the Ukrainian people? So impunity has very serious consequences, not only in the country such as Syria, but elsewhere as well. You are the founder of the Syrian Legal Development Program, and I think one of your colleagues is here as well. And you have degrees from Oxford University and Manchester University. Could I get a warm applause for Ibrahim while he comes to the stage? You look a bit shy, but don't be shy because you've done so much work already on the microphone is next to you. Ibrahim, thank you for being with us. And could you tell us briefly, how did you get involved in the work, the quest of justice for Syrians? The mic will go on, you don't have to do anything.
Well, thank you so much for having me today and for such a kind introduction. I guess the answer to your question is we don't have a choice. In that kind of work that we're doing, it's not about being able to get involved with something. It's that you have to get involved with something, because the alternative is giving up. The alternative is giving a space to perpetrators to get away. The alternative is to let our history and what happened and the crimes and the norms and all of that just vanish. So for many of us, addressing this issue of impunity for chemical weapons it hasn't been so much of a choice. But the way we kind of got involved as a group around this was trying to find ways to really, find some sort of political will. Every time we used to speak to politicians, to civil servants, to others, they say, yeah, but there's no political will around Syria, right? There's a Syria fatigue. It's been going on for too long, and so on. So we decided to look where there might be political will. Something that the world after World War I has said we shouldn't see ever again. Mostly one of the most widely ratified treaties, the Chemical Weapons Convention. Entire organizations, ministries, entire departments and foreign offices that look into this. And obviously a horrific crime. A crime that is a weapon of terror. A crime where you literally don't know where to run, where to breathe. It's literally attacking the most innate thing about you, which is breathing. It's not something that you can kind of avoid in that sense. So all these factors together brought Syrian lawyers, survivors, human rights defenders, victims, those who formed organizations, first responders, and we all became involved together in trying to at least find a solution where the world has said, not us, that anyone, everyone, whatever the quote is, there are people here that know it better, whoever uses chemical weapons should be held to account. And that's how we all got involved in this.
Well, we all remember when certain American leaders said there is a red line there, and then the red line became a dotted line and there was no line anymore. And 10 years later, we have to bring the red line back into the equation, I guess. Can you tell us a bit about the setup of this tribunal? Take us into the nitty-gritty of the idea. And I think you worked on it for 2 years. Quite amazing that you kept it silent. How did you manage to do that? And tell us also about the timing. Why last week?
Well, for those of you who know Syrians, know why she says it's amazing to keep it quiet for 2 years, because it's very hard to keep something a secret. You know, like, we love leakages and things going out and, you know, people protesting against what happened and taking it to Facebook and Twitter and all of that. But that didn't happen because I think there was a very high sense of responsibility of those involved that we may be up to something here. But before we actually go public, the idea of why we didn't go public, before I get into the kind of nitty-gritties, why we didn't go public earlier, is for 2 reasons. One, it's for us. I don't think there's any Syrian who is working on human rights or suffered abuses is this an entrepreneurial mindset. I'm not going to sit in some sort of incubator and try and set something up and on justice, and then if it fails, it's okay, I'm going to restart. The amount of trauma, the amount of witnesses, the experiences that people witness to bring it forward, we need to make sure that there is at least some sort of political will behind it before we introduce it, before we work on it, before we get others to, you know, think about that there might be something there. So that is one of the reasons why we wanted to develop it properly before kind of getting it around. And the other reason is that, from what I know, governments get proposals and ideas tossed around, you know, all the time. Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? And so on. And these, for good or bad reasons, get dismissed. You know, and people ask questions, well, how are you going to set it up? How are you going to fund it? Who's behind it? What's the wording? What's all of this? So we wanted to go with something a bit more concrete. And that required a lot of work in the building. So the idea is that, put very simply, what Germany can do on its own in terms of prosecuting crimes that did not take place in Germany is a right that Germany has as a state. Whether it exercises or doesn't exercise it, whether it interprets it liberally or not liberally, it doesn't matter. But it has the right as a state to have jurisdiction over those crimes. And it enshrined that rights in treaties that said we should ensure respect for all of these things. So instead of Germany doing it on its own, Germany, another country from Europe, another country from Asia, another country from Africa, one from Latin America and North America would come together and say, we all know we have this right, but instead of exercising it domestically, we are creating this body that does it for us. So it's the collective delegation of governments who are coming together and saying, no, this shouldn't be something left just for Germany to prosecute because this is a universal crime that requires a universal response and shouldn't be left to just one country to shoulder the burden, which makes it also easier to dismiss it as political. I mean, universal jurisdiction is incredibly important for countries that, you know, has taken leaderships, Germany, France, the French judges, what they've done. But it will become even more stronger if it doesn't, it's in the last crime that we have in Syria that we can say it's not an East versus West, it's chemical weapons. It's the last crime that we're seeing votes in the African blocs and in the Gulag in Latin America and the Asian blocs that are voting for accountability for chemical weapons. So it builds upon this political momentum. It builds upon the General Assembly resolutions, Security Council resolutions that say all perpetrators must be held to the account. The world passed, not one country. And it's countries coming together to establishing that body that we're calling the Exceptional Chemical Weapons Tribunal, that then would it would build upon all the investigations that were mentioned. This is actually the last step and the return on investment. And instead of then the arrest warrant being binding on one country, it'll be binding on 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 in that sense. So it makes it harder for perpetrators to move around. It sends a stronger political message. It upholds the universality of the norm, and it can be done. And that's what we kind of developed. We looked into the budgets. We developed a budget, a 13-page budget. I've never seen something like that as a lawyer before. The organogram, the draft treaty, the arguments. We've put everything together, and obviously governments were consulted throughout. And then on the 30th of November, we decided to say we're going and publicly asking for this in order for governments that are really serious about protecting the norm internationally to say we've heard you and we're responding.
And there is a website.
There is a website. And, Usually domains are quite expensive, but calling it CW Tribunal, I can't remember how much it cost, but it wasn't, right? So that's the beauty of working on human rights and justice, that no one cares about a domain.
CWtribunal.org?
It's called the CWtribunal.org. So and you will see it not branded. You'll see victims, survivors, organizations who've been working on this, and it's a growing list of people who are kind of signing up to this, and we were very happy that Reuters across 3 different desks, their MENA desk, their OPCW Netherlands desk, and their war crimes desk all come together to kind of kick off that exclusive story that came out on Thursday, and they spoke to diplomats and so on. So it's all online. I mean, we're happy that one of the main goals was that if you Google now on your phone exceptional chemical weapons tribunal or chemical weapons tribunal, you should be able to at least see something where it's already showing. And that for us, at a time of denial, disinformation, lack of justice, lack of opportunities, perpetrators being normalized, victims being denied a space, is in itself a success. That at least we're bringing back the conversation on the table. You like it, you don't like it, you want to criticize it, you don't like the 13-page budget, it's up to you. But the idea, I'm just obsessed with that document.
I have 2 more questions before we go to the other panelists. We agreed on this. Now, there is a multilateral framework of all kinds of organizations, mechanisms dealing with, banishing chemical weapons. So, devil's advocate, what's the added value? How can this add to the already existing multilateral? Catherine speaks about the ecosystem. We'll talk to her later, to the ecosystem of mechanisms.
So part of why we decided to kind of pursue this route is that we saw diplomats screaming, well, not literally screaming, but looking for kind of ways to do something. The chemical weapons diplomats, because they worked so hard on getting the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons to have a new function on accountability, have a new function on investigation. But the question they always have is, what is next? I have this report, I've attributed, I fought, I got the votes, German diplomats included. They're fighting the fight there in The Hague. And they're pushing and they're trying to get resolutions in Security Council. When Germany was there, this was one of the high times for kind of chemical weapons accountability. But there was always the question of what next. So clearly the multilateral system, because there was an attempt to refer Syria to the ICC that was vetoed in 2014, was blocked. So we don't have an international criminal court. That's one institution blocked. The Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons is under enormous pressure to find solutions for accountability within the organizations. I mean, I had Global South diplomats telling me we've never had a vote in the OPCW until Syria. Everything was consensus. Now we're voting on Syria resolutions. So clearly on one side, the multilateral system on chemical weapons is actually, in my opinion, crumbling. It's producing evidence that's being doubted, that has no way for a court to come and test its integrity. The organization that was always based on consensus is no longer based on that. The UN is blocked, but nevertheless, the suggestion we came with can easily fit within the system, because speaking to ICC lawyers, former people, very senior that are linked to the ICC, they can say, in order for cases to get to the ICC without getting too technical, states must not be willing and able to do something. So it's a court of last resort in a way. So if member states come together and collectively exercise the willing and able, then it's still within the multilateral framework. No one is saying, step out. And in any case, you can leverage this court and say, we're doing this. And that's why we've put exceptional, we even have branding people that got involved, because it is not how it's supposed to happen. What's supposed to happen is that we managed to get stuff at the UN, we managed to get the ICC, and so leverage and carry the conversation forward, and if any country has an issue with it, what can be done with literally signing a paper of Syria joining the Rome Statute. Literally involves not raising your hand when there is a draft resolution on a referral. But until then, states should show leadership and say, we will not wait, and we will exercise within our sovereign rights, jurisdiction, and come together and say no collectively to this crime within the multilateral system.
For now, I have one last question, but you'll stay with us in the panel, and you will also have the opportunity to react to the other speakers. I know you don't like dream scenarios, definitely not in this nightmarish scenario, but still, let's do some magical thinking. Imagine the political will is there, and this exceptional chemical weapons tribunal starts flying. I don't want to call it this, I don't know how to define success. But let's say you get what you want in an X amount of years. We're back here, and you tell us, this is what we have achieved. Tell us 3 things that you really would like to achieve with this trajectory.
Well, the good news is that I don't have to imagine that the political will is there, because we are getting it from some governments. So that's the good start. You know, they're getting us to directors, they're getting us to ministers. I mean, I spoke to 2 foreign ministers already. Like, the matter is moving, because people, you know, on chemical weapons still have this, they care about it not coming back. But for us, success started already, because we are experienced in disappointments. So we manage our own expectations for, you know, mental health purposes, that for me, success is not convictions. Success is not the end of it. Success, first of all, has shown that 10 years on, Syrians are able to come together, notwithstanding the amount of pressure that they were under. You know, the video that talks about the tribunal has 13 videos from 13 different locations, cities, and countries. And the organizations are from the United States to inside Syria, the people who were there.
So we have the political will, the ongoing courage and persistence of the Syrians. Third one?
And the third one is really bringing back the idea that we're holding on to this norm and holding perpetrators to account through the process. I never want to see convictions as just the only success. Every step in the way is showing determination. And I think that's a success, that it's not just perpetrators that make history, and they made history by bringing back chemical weapons. It's governments that are also making history in finding other ways as a response to the leadership, actually, of perpetrators in setting history.
Thank you, Ibrahim. Stay with us, because we're going now to Lyon. And I'm looking at the technical team, because I would very much like to call Lubna Al-Kanawati with us. Lubna, while we're getting her on the screen, I can tell a little bit about her background. She is a Syrian feminist. She is a women's rights activist. She's the deputy director of an organization that's also very close to my heart, Women Now for Development. She has been active from the early days of the Syrian revolution, fighting for justice and dignity. She has also worked on women in conflict, on humanitarian aid. It's a long list of activities, but I think it's very important for you to know who Lubna is. She has fought against human rights abuses by the Assad regime, and she has also advocated for accountability for chemical weapons attacks, and she is always working on gender-based violence, combating gender-based violence, I have to say. And if you again, she's also in this clip on the website, cwtribunal.org, in a small clip with a number of activists talking about standing with justice and don't suffocate us twice. Earlier today, Lubna and I spoke, and I told her I would give her the floor to share with us her observations, her involvement. So maybe give her a warm round of applause to encourage her and send her warm regards from Berlin. Lubna, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Petra. I hope my voice is clear.
It is.
I also want to add that I'm also a member of the Association of Victims of Chemical Weapons. And I will start by this information because on 15 of November, we've got the arrest warrant against 4 characters. One of them is Bashar al-Assad. So this was also a very good push, let's say, toward justice. I chose to start by this information because you've been mentioning the red line of Mr. Obama, and the red line had a very bad impact on us as victims and survivors. For me, it was a big frustration, injustice. But after 10 years, I can say now, I got hope again. I want to say that I was part of the case that was in France, me and my other colleagues, the survivors. Also, there is Syrian NGO, but this is a case built on survivors' testimony, and this is very important. And this is show also the leadership of the survivor in this fight. We also, as association and as individual and as survivor, a lot of us were part of the organization who've been working closely with Ibrahim. I want to thank Ibrahim also about all the effort that have been done. All this, we've been engaged in very intensive way since April on a weekly basis to set the atmosphere for what happened, what we've been announcing on the 30th of November. What I want to say, and I mentioned to Betra earlier, that it's very exhausting for survival to keep testimony and give this testimony over and over again. So I'm gonna limit my talk tonight about what I've witnessed or of what I experienced, because last month was really very heavy. We've got a lot of, we've exposed a lot as survivor for the media to talk about the tribunal, to talk about the arrest warrant, to talk about also we have a big conference in The Hague. All this stuff have triggered a lot of traumas that we have. And this is exhausting, but here also I want to mention the essential role of the Syrian civil society who provide the support. For me personally, I couldn't make it without the support of my organization, because this is something usually people don't talk about, you need a lot to be able to testify, to keep talking. This ongoing effort after 10 years is really very exhausting. So for us, especially for us as women who are involved in this files, we have a different layer of pressure and risk that we need to deal with. So having a proper support is very essential to keep our activism and alive. The second thing I want to mention about the tribunal, I know you asked Ibrahim, but I like to answer your last question also. Petra, memories are very painful, and every time you remember, you cannot ease that pain. It's really very, very painful. I feel personally like the starting a process of accountability can finally make me at least start healing, because I don't know where to go with my memory. And I know that from other survivors who are living the same situation, where to go with all those pictures, with all the photos, with all the names of the people who've been killed by the chemical attack. First of all, they are not honored yet, because we know that Syrian regime, also the Russian, have erased all the graves that exist, that they overtake again. They trying to erase all the evidence, and they play a big effort by denial and disinformation and threatening the witnesses. So we really need to start feel like we can move on. And for me, I don't believe we can move on without having a real justice process, accountability process. alive and effective. This is the second part. I want to mention the role of women on this kind of cases, the essential role of women. But please let me know how many minutes still I have, because I know
You have 2 more minutes.
Okay.
I'm sorry
so
for being so strict.
It's fine. So what I want to say that we in the organization work on a very in-depth report about the gender impact of the chemical attack. And when we are talking about gender, we mean all type of gender. We are not just limited to women, but we are also highlighting the experience of women in such crimes, and it's different from other groups. So presenting women and women perspective in this kind of crimes is really very, very essential if we want to achieve justice, equal justice and transformative justice that is sustainable and that's reflect to the whole community. So women must be exist in everywhere, of course, but in such a files, because we know it's very difficult. And of course, I don't want here to point any finger to any party, but I want to say that the public atmosphere is not protected enough. It's not safe for women to be involved in such crimes. It's very difficult, and we need more effort to support women's right defender, and especially who are participating in this in chemical fights. Thank you, Petra.
Thank you very much, Lubna, for your observations and your insight. And I started my introduction with this painting by Ahmed Mualla of this figure carrying another figure. And this was when I learned that when we talk about conflict, the only way to solve this in a just and dignified way, we have to look at all genders and to include the needs and the voices of women. I know that you've spoken a lot about this, Lubna. I watched this afternoon again your testimony in the UN Security Council, and I can recommend all of you to look at it because it's very clear where you stand, and I think I commend you for your courage. And also your voice is always in my head when we are programming. Women should be at the table and not in some side room, and we have to have various voices of different women because we need an intersectional approach, and women like you are a great source of inspiration in my work. So thank you for that, and stay with us. And in the meantime, I'm looking at our next speaker, who was generous enough to be with us. Please give a warm hand for Bente Scheller, the head of the Middle East and North Africa Department of the Heinrich-Böll Foundation. Bente, we are going into our more panel-like approach, and we will talk to you and also to Catherine Marchi-Uhel, who will talk about the IIIM. When we talk about finding justice for the use of chemical weapons in Syria, why do we find this important? You already said a few things in the beginning, but I think we should elaborate a little bit more about the importance of addressing specifically accountability for chemical weapons attacks.
Thank you, Petra. And maybe for those in the live stream, Malick Bellack unfortunately couldn't make it today, so this is why I came here on her seat. And thank you to Lubna. I'm always so moved. If survivors share their experience, it must be so hard. And I feel it really that she already said some of the most important things. But if we look at it, if we look at what happened, it was exceptional in terms of how big the breach was, how massive the breach of international norms was. And here, when we look at it, often chemical weapons are considered as a weapon with which you can attack only indiscriminately. However, we have to see chemical weapons use in Syria happened always behind the front lines. So it was nearly exclusively civilians who were affected, and therefore I think we have a very important element here too, why we need to seek justice for the victims and for the survivors. And we also you touched upon it basically, the lack of willingness and the inability of the international community to find an appropriate response to the use of chemical weapons possibly encouraged further human rights violations, encouraged further use of chemical weapons in Syria, and we are not yet at the end of all conflicts in the world. We might see this weapon being used somewhere else, and therefore I think to have a court that would deal with this topic as such would be such an important international step that I think these are really important elements why we really have to pursue it. And let me add one thing you said, Ibrahim. In 2014, there was an attempt to refer Syria to the International Criminal Court, and it failed. We also should remember that there was a UN Security Council resolution. After chemical weapons had been used in 2013, there was a resolution by the Security Council. That means Russia also voted for it, in which it was made very clear continued use of chemical weapons in Syria should then be taken seriously. It should have serious consequences leading up to an intervention. It never happened because ever after, Russia once again blocked all efforts of investigating properly. So we had a moment in which even Russia confirmed that it was not accepting this, but the opportunity was missed.
I remember vividly I was doing a lot of political commentary on Dutch and European media, and at the time in 2013, the disinformation started immediately. I was attacked on Dutch television and radio. How was I so sure where these attacks came from? This whataboutism and this yes but. And when I listen to Lubna's testimony, I feel like this is also part of the success, that finally we can show what happened, and this was not some kind of out-of-space attack. We know who the perpetrators are, and yes, some attacks were done later on by Daesh and other extremist groups, but it's very clear that the regime has done most of the horrific attacks. So this whole disinformation aspect of it can be dealt with as well, I guess, in this tribunal. How do you see this?
Well, it has to be dealt with because we were also discussing this issue here in the room several years before. And there were survivors also, and there were people in the audience saying, well, it was all staged, it can't be real. So this is, of course, victimizing people a second time. It is an insult, and it is something that was very successful in other issue areas of the Syrian conflict as well. Disinformation is to be taken seriously.
Yeah, every time I tweet something about or X something about the white helmets, I immediately get all the trolls from the troll factories. We know where they're sitting. Binta, Germany has a feminist foreign policy. We have it still in the Netherlands. We hope after the horrible election results that we can keep it. Other countries, France, Slovenia, Spain, Canada, Mexico, Colombia, Chile, they all have feminist foreign policy. For the viewers at home and here in the room, how can feminist foreign policy actually give an answer when we're dealing with finding justice? Lubna alluded to the importance of having a gender-based approach to involve women's rights activists, to also work with women's rights defenders. I mean, how do you see feminist foreign policy as a tool to be even more effective?
Well, I'm not sure how I can see it as a tool, but we should step back also and see the gendered component in chemical weapons use. It was studied well in the case of Syria. I already said that most of the victims were civilians, and here also we have so many women and children affected. While in the Syrian front lines, there were only 5% of the confirmed victims female. It was 43% of those who were confirmed dead in the chemical weapons attacks, which is huge. 60 to 80% of those who were treated after chemical weapons use were female. And therefore, I think it has a huge gendered component that might not be that obvious. If we only hear about chemical weapons being used, we think, well, it pretty much hits everybody who is in the area. But I think the sheer numbers here tell us a different story. And then Lubna also mentioned what happens in the aftermath. I mean, she was probably also not referring only to the direct consequences, but looking further ahead. In the war in Syria, gender roles transformed for many regions because there would simply not be many men any longer, having fled, having died in the war, having been arrested, having been disappeared forcibly. So in many regions that were under attack, women took on different roles, and as heads of the households, they were the ones to ultimately make the decision to stay or to leave in areas. And given the responsibilities they were shouldering for their families, for their children, I think the chemical weapons used in Syria really had a very strong component, pushing out women, pushing out families, and we should not overlook this. And the chemical weapons attacks as such should be considered under this gender lens, and there is a role for feminist foreign policy to really pay account to that, pay tribute to that, and make sure that then when dealing with it, women are heard, the gendered lens is applied.
Yeah, it's how do we deal with the not now response when we talk about gender? I mean, we will talk about it with Catherine as well, because this is something I saw also, I mean, it's a little bit beside the point of this evening, but during COVID, but also during crisis, climate change, floods, when you want to talk about the effect it has on women, people are like, no, we first have to, so the not now, how can we go beyond that?
Well, it is already in the files, it is in the testimonies, it is in looking at the really large-scale effects, and therefore I think it should be prioritized here. And then, of course, especially seeing the strong push of civil society here, in these ranks we have so many capable females, we have so many Syrian female lawyers who are pushing for justice. So we have everything that it would take to really do this in a gender-sensitive, inclusive way.
Coming to the international community and impunity. It sounds like a rhyme. We see this not only in Syria, but also in Ukraine and in other parts of the world. So how could this idea of this new exceptional chemical weapons tribunal, how can this become a way to create justice? I mean, in a way, it's also the success question, although I find it a difficult one. I mean, in such nightmarish circumstances, what's his success? But how can it be?
Well, here we already know that the roads for justice are limited in the case of Syria, and we might find many other cases worldwide where also there is no possibility to refer cases to the ICC, and where national courts under the principle of universal jurisdiction might simply not seem adequate because of the size and the universality of the problem. And therefore this court, I think, would set a precedent. It is different from other international special tribunals that we have seen for Lebanon or for single countries, because this one goes by a thematic area, which is really an interesting and important mechanism. Also, it is not focused on one perpetrator, but it is about investigating all cases of chemical weapons use and holding the relevant perpetrators accountable. I think that is very important to consider. And I think also, but Catherine will talk about it. I think here we have a court that is being suggested that would not need to start from the scratch, because it could base a lot of its work on what IIIM has already achieved.
What a good bridge to go to Geneva. And thank you very much, Bente. I'm very pleased to introduce to you Catherine Marchi-Uhel. I don't know whether I pronounced your last name correctly. Apologies for that, but we agreed that we would be on first name basis. Catherine is, and I'm going to have to read this, the leader of the international, impartial and independent mechanism to assist in the investigation and prosecution of persons responsible for the most serious crimes under international law committed in the Syrian Arab Republic since March 2011, also known as IIIM. And I see why you have this abbreviation.
An acronym.
And Catherine has a long-standing experience as a judge, but also as a prominent special advisor in the UN on Iraq, on Kosovo, on Cambodia. So it's a great honor to have her with us, and also for her a warm applause of encouragement. Catherine, last week you gave me a masterclass in IIIM and the work you do. No, for me, this is my intellectual curiosity and my connection to Syria. I'm very grateful that I was asked to be the moderator for tonight. But for the people at home and also the people in the audience, can you tell us in in 1-2 minutes, what does IIIM do, and what do you do?
Thank you, Petra. And let me first express my appreciation and gratitude for inviting me to join this event. And I really feel humbled to be on this panel with Ibrahim and Lubna and Bente. So the IIIM, in a nutshell, has been really a consequence of this defeated attempt to refer the Syrian situation to the International Criminal Court by use of veto in 2014. The international community and the General Assembly in particular has not accepted that as being the final word on accountability for crimes committed in Syria. And by establishing the IIIM, it decided that there should be an effort to gather, to preserve the evidence and all the information of core international crimes. By this, I mean war crimes, crime against humanity, genocide, alleged to have been committed in Syria, and that the analysis of this material should start with a view to be what really has been conceived by the General Assembly as a justice facilitator to assist existing investigation, but also investigation before court that may acquire at a later stage jurisdiction for crimes committed in Syria. And it's very important, I think, to stress, in response to your question, Petra, that use of chemical weapons, this prohibition, among all the prohibition, is at the core of the mandate. There is express reference by the General Assembly in the resolution and in our terms of reference later to the fact that we should gather, as part of this material to be gathered, the material gathered by the OPCW, but also by the joint mechanism between the United Nations and the OPCW, the work done by the Commission of Inquiry, and importantly, all the work and material gathered by Syrian civil society actors themselves. So that's what we've been created to do. And we have devoted quite significant resources early on as part of our structural investigation into crimes committed in Syria on the issue of unlawful attacks, which as its core also embraces use of chemical weapons. You're right, Petra, when you refer to the fact that that we're talking about multiple actors involved in the Syrian conflict, but obviously that's applying to in the case of use of chemical weapons. But you're also right to say that there have been a number of instances currently already attributed by different organs to the Syrian government and also to ISIL in this respect.
Well, thank you for that. And so the proposed exceptional chemical weapons tribunal and their attempt to really achieve justice for the Syrians, how does it connect to your work? I mean, where is the complementarity?
Well, it directly connects for this very reason that we are not a court or even a prosecutor's office. Established to facilitate justice, the work that we do, and I'll delve a little bit into that in relation to chemical weapons, the work that we do needs a home. It needs a court to be used as evidence, as analytical work, as case building, are part of the work we do. We need courts to use that material, to use that work and that effort, and to give it and to give victims and survivors concrete instances of justice. So when I refer to gathering material, in our case, it's been really first going to those entities that reported extensively on the use of chemical weapons. I'm thinking in particular about the Commission of Inquiry on Syria, this Human Rights Council entity, created entity. I'm thinking of the OPCW itself, which has a fact-finding mission, which has established a large number of existing use of chemical weapons. I'm thinking of the joint mechanism between OPCW and the UN, which was conceived by the Security Council at the time before being killed in 2018. This was conceived as an attribution mechanism, and more recently, the OPCW established in a way to replace the JIM, the previous entity, an investigation and identification team, the AAT, again, to attribute those instances found to be instances of use of chemical weapons to whichever entity is considered to be responsible for them. And that collection of going to these entities and seeking to collect the underlying material of their reports is critical. Why is that? Because when you think of criminal justice, the courts, particularly when it comes to establishing facts of the conduct of a particular accused or linking particular crimes to a particular accused, they're going to want to see the underlying material. They're not going to rely, or at least for other things that contextual, they will not rely directly on reports. They will want to see the underlying material. So our first work has been to collect this material. It's taking a lot of efforts. I will not go into details here, but definitely having a very supportive response from the OPCW very early on, having a AAT making it clear each time it issues a report that they are already preparing to share material with the AAM has been critical for us. And when we seek to collect material, obviously we go to civil society because they've done an enormous amount of work, and all the material that they've gathered and that they accept to share with us of multiple forms is really critical to aggregate and to build those cases that we've been mandated to build. But without Court of Justice to use this material and to bring perpetrators to justice, the work that we do would be useless. It may be
Catherine,
comforting to know
Catherine?
that it's not lost. Yes,
Sorry
go ahead.
We agreed that I was allowed to interrupt her in this way.
Absolutely.
So it's a home, the exceptional tribunal. I already referred to you the word you used in our contact last week, the ecosystem. Now, I strongly believe in multilateralism, and I guess many people in this room as well, but we're dealing, of course, with, there is a political environment within Europe, but also in the whole global discussion on international law that, self-interest becomes first, the nativism and nationalism. Look what happened in my own country, in the Netherlands, the result of the elections. And there are these political trends want to kill multilateralism. So how do we respond to the criticism that we have enough, we don't need another institution? How would you respond to that? Briefly, please.
I think I have a quick but clear response to that. Out of the 317 requests for assistance that we've received from 16 different jurisdictions, mainly national courts, related to crimes committed in Syria, only a handful, less than a handful, relate to use of chemical weapons. So that gives you an idea of how sufficient avenues for justice we currently have.
That's a very clear answer.
In the ecosystem, the idea, for instance, of the court, the International Criminal Court being one day able to take its part would be satisfactory, would be very satisfactory, but how could it take more than maybe one case of use of chemical weapons? And we're talking about hundreds of instances that have been documented.
So it's a home. It's a home in the middle of an ecosystem which will create more avenues. Last question. Lubna and Bente spoke about the gender aspect. How have you included this gender lens in your work?
Well, it's an important aspect of the methodology we're using, because we're very conscious that in the past, accountability processes have been having a deficit of focus on gender crimes, gender-based crimes, but also on the gender consequences and impact of crimes on individuals on the basis of their different genders. And for us, it's a dedicated approach. It means collecting evidence and testimonies and searching the evidence we collect for signs of such impact. It's also listening to the views and the perspective of various victims and survivors from different gender. It's about looking at the particular impact of use of chemical weapons in the immediate commission of the crime, but also the far-reaching consequences it has on female, male, boys and girls, and really trying to make sure that the cases we build and the analytical work we've developed to support justice is reflecting that.
And I also appreciated, and maybe you can say a little bit as well about how you dealt with your team and how you dealt also with preparing interviews. It seems so logical, but when you look into it, very often you get these gender-neutral questionnaires where you basically forget to look into everything Lubna said and you're saying as well. So how did you deal with it in your team and in your colleagues?
In the team, it's been really an effort of making sure that gender is understood as an important component of the work we do. It's been deciding not to leave it in the hands of one or a couple of experts in the team, but deciding that it's every team member's responsibility to integrate a gender perspective and a gender analysis in the work for those who are involved in the analytical work. It's making sure that the investigators focus on this aspect, that they include it in their investigative plans, in their interviews, that the colleagues who are developing analytical work are featuring that as part of it. And we developed very simple but effective tools to do that, checklist, as we call it, which makes sure that as you conduct your work as an investigator, an analyst, a lawyer, or of course as someone dealing with direct contact with the victims in terms of protection or support, that you are integrating those aspects into your work. So nothing revolutionary in terms of, something very, very logical, but that is rarely used by accountability mechanism in such a systematic and across-the-board way.
Thank you for this. And I'm going back to Ibrahim and Bente here. And please, Lubna and Catherine, if you have anything you want to add. And I will also come to the audience. So I'm already inviting the audience to think about clear questions, not lectures, please. Going back to Ibrahim, you're listening to this. What comes up in your mind? I mean, when you listen to Lubna and Catherine and Bente, your reaction to their statements. It's a broad question, I know, but I know that you have clear ideas on how to proceed. So,
well, in a way, it's very overwhelming to hear the amount of support and from different perspectives on an idea, on a proposal, coming from different perspectives, coming from different ideas, seeing how this kind of fulfills a certain gap. It's very emotional for the group that has worked, and some of them are here with us and listening over the last two years on this, to see, okay, we might have actually stumbled on something that seems like it may work. And again, that for us is already a sign of success. The fact that we are having this panel here today, the fact that we are discussing it, the fact that we are bringing it again to the forefront, the fact that that Catherine is there, and I know it's she had to be very careful about how to speak on these things, because obviously she's in a very kind of important position, but nevertheless was happy to speak to Reuters in that article. Lubna being there from kind of day one, pushing forward. I think this idea of civil society, international organizations, and some diplomats being able to work together in itself is it's refreshing. I mean, honestly, as a Syrian, I haven't seen it in the last 10 years in that way. We've seen some around, in different initiatives. Now, the other 50% of my week, as you said, go to Ukraine, and there I see it incredibly. Like, it's the same diplomats from the same government I see in a different meeting, and there, they're all kind of trying to find ways for accountability and pushing forward, and all the legal issues disappear and so on. But in Syria, we never had that. There are 2 points I wanted to kind of touch upon very quickly. One is the issue of Ukraine, and the other one is the issue of disinformation. So, a group of us, including the current head of the Association of Victims of Chemical Weapons, did a trip to Ukraine, to Kiev. And we managed to speak to survivors, to victims, to doctors, to the prosecutor general, and myself and Dr. Salim managed to speak to President Zelensky in Kiev at the time. And we went there actually on the week of the anniversary of chemical weapons. So August 23rd, 21st of August during that week. And it was very overwhelming, the support and the sense of solidarity that we got. The speech of the prosecutor general being very clear that we know if it wasn't for the impunity that Russia had in Syria, that we wouldn't be dealing with those things. And appreciating that we're there with them in Kiev, showing solidarity was an incredible sense of that. And if the Ukrainians didn't see it as important, President Zelensky would not have mentioned it actually in his GA speech. That the main person that put chemical weapons back on the world stage was President Zelensky in his General Assembly speech, and he said if it wasn't for Russia, chemical weapons would not have happened in Syria, and that was kind of following our trip there. So clearly, this idea of upholding norms does have ripple effects, and does have impact on other conflicts. Now, in the situation of Ukraine, we're lucky that we have ICC jurisdiction. So, God forbid, shall there be use of any chemical weapons? And in that sense, the International Criminal Court should have, in theory, depending on what's being used, jurisdiction there. But that's not what we have in Syria. But this idea of, survivors, victims, people who are human rights defenders coming together, even across conflicts, is quite strong. The other point on kind of denial and disinformation, you asked me about successes, and honestly, and my wife thinks I'm absolutely crazy generally, but on this point specifically, that I saw that the sign of success was that Sputnik, the Russian kind of big media outlet, picked up the tribunal in less than 24 hours, right? And it was just fascinating for me to see a whole new disinformation tactic come to life. And the title was, Syria proposes a chemical weapons tribunal, right? Next level, and it's like Syrian diplomats engage countries from 44 countries to establish a chemical weapons tribunal to investigate the use that's been happening and that the Syrian government has been blamed for and all of that. And that for me was, that editor is genius, right? Because that in me already signaled that we're already on the right track, right? If the Russian agency Sputnik picked it up immediately and tried to do what they do, is kind of put information out there that is misleading, wrong. The title looks pro-regime. You read it. They mention the IIIM, and they say, Catherine says to Reuters that it's important to have accountability, but they use that to say the IIIM is not doing enough. And they say we need something because the OPCW is bad. So they attack all the institutions to kind of promote the tribunal. It's actually, I don't want to increase the readership, but it's an incredible article that shows, which was quicker than German media in picking it up and Dutch media picking it up, which shows for us that there's already a sign of success.
It's a strange compliment, isn't it?
It's a very strange compliment, but it was incredible to read, honestly.
While I was listening to you, I was also remembering an event that I attended, I think in London, when you had your presentation of your book, The Waiting Game, based, I wouldn't say popular, but the book that was based on your PhD. How will this be received by the regime in Damascus? The more I'm listening to Lubna and to Ibrahim and to Catherine, I'm like, I think they're getting worried.
Well, I hope
they should. They should be worried, huh?
Absolutely.
How do you read this? Because you could say that Assad's waiting game was kind of successful. There is kind of a normalization. There are more and more governments in Europe saying, the winning party in the Netherlands has a statement in their party program that Syria is safe and Syria can be sent back. And I think this sort of cross-cuts this, and it's like, no, there is no justice, there is impunity, and so you might wait as long as you want, but there will be justice.
I hope, of course. In my book, I thought that the chemical weapons use really would be the one thing the regime does not survive. So, of course, I was also bothered by the fact that for so long it could even get over that. But I think the court is one step. I think the arrest warrant that Lubna mentioned is one. Here's also my colleague Sarah, who just published an article on the COP28, the climate summit that is currently happening in the UAE.
And he didn't go.
The regime was invited, Assad was invited, and he didn't go. The UAE has an extradition agreement with France, so possibly Assad could have been arrested there. This would have been beautiful. Then we'd obviously not be sitting here only chatting, but we'll probably also celebrate. But I think it is a success, and I hope the regime is worried. I think it must be worried. And I think here also, it's very interesting, the Sputnik thing that you mentioned, Ibrahim, because I think for Russia, the chemical weapons issue in Syria was always a bit complicated. I think they gave the regime a free hand to try, and they looked away with all the instances of chlorine use. But in the end, in 2013, there was the deal between Kerry and Lavrov above the head of the Syrian regime, and Russia somehow came out as a guarantor for that deal. So then, we fast forward to 2017, the Brussels conference, the biggest donor conference, is happening, and Russia obviously always was interested in bringing money for reconstruction to Syria, and this Brussels conference was absolutely important for Russia. On the second day, or even on the first day of that conference, Assad once again used sarin in Khan Sheikhoun. So that was really something that was, in the first place, of course, affecting the people in Khan Sheikhoun. And of course, it was the most traumatic and dramatic for them. But for Russia also, this was such an insult by the Syrian regime. So I think they are really puzzled what to make out of it. And this is the next step, yeah.
Okay, I would like to go to the audience. We have somebody with the microphone, so please raise a hand and state your name and try to be brief. I will we'll do one question by one. And who has a question for the panel? Either Lubna, Catherine online, or Bente and Ibrahim here on the screen. Somebody should be first. I see a lady in the front row. Could you state your name and maybe your affiliation?
Thank you so much, first of all. Is this working?
It's on.
Yeah, okay. So my name is Valeska Held. I'm the research fellow at the Rule of Law program of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung in Beirut, Lebanon. My question is a very legal one. I was just wondering how the tribunal would be legally set up, what the framework would be, because in the absence of a UN resolution, you would probably do it similarly as the ICC, I'm guessing, having different countries signing a statute. That would be my first question. And then related to that, the question of the potential conflict of competence between the ICC, for example, the tribunal, and other national courts. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So a legal question, and I think it goes to you, Ibrahim.
So, yes, the legal basis is very similar to the Nuremberg trials. It's a couple of countries coming together to sign a treaty to saying we're saying no to this, in that sense. And so, states have the right to prosecute things individually, and they could do so collectively. But in order for us, to push this matter forward, I got to kind of legal director levels at certain foreign ministers. And they didn't say that so clearly, but they said, can we get someone a bit more with seniority confirming what you're saying in that sense? So I went back to Oxford, and my professor was Professor Lupa Canti, who at the moment has the highest kind of honor at Oxford, and he's a member of the International Law Commission in that sense. And I know he probably regrets becoming my academic advisor because I used all my student time on this rather than on the substance, but he's been incredibly helpful in kind of setting the legal basis. And very early on, people were saying you can do collectively, and he wrote papers on that sense. But we had a conference in Oxford, a workshop, and, Dapo got his friends, which for me are the gods of international law, the people that I have their books behind them, and we were discussing the legal basis for this. Absolutely legal. There's nothing. I mean, it's the legal basis. It's far more stronger than saying the GA can create something. In a way, when the Security Council created the former Yugoslavia court, that was challenged legally, saying what legal right does the council have to create courts. The first defense trials actually discussed the legality of the. Here, it wouldn't be as much because the legal right is coming from states, and states are delegating it to international organizations, and that's how it works. In how things are, or how it can relate to complementarity and the ICC and so on. So we were absolutely clear that in the narrative, first of all, we have to say that this is an exception, not the norm, because the ICC should be the norm for these things, but because of the blockage. So then that's the narrative, right? So the preambular clauses would be recognizing that the ICC would be the usual venue, blah, 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 but has a veto. But then what we also say is that this court should cede jurisdiction shall there ever be a referral to the ICC. So it's kind of an emergency exceptional mechanism that comes together because of the use of chemical weapons. And we've integrated the rules of evidence, and we've integrated all these matters in that sense. Now, how it links to their domestic courts is a matter for up to states to decide. So what we've also been very careful is how far should we push what we're developing? I mean, I think we're about 200 pages now on things, right? Everything included. But I'm not there I shouldn't be the role of civil societies and survivors and first responders and to come together and really put something so concrete in that sense. But we have, to really deal with every issue. But there are questions, how does it deal with our own courts? What's the exact mandate? Does it cover Syria or beyond? It should be for states to discuss. And the ask now is for states to form a working group to discuss the best approaches around it. And that is the ask. No one is saying that there are no longer issues. I'm sure there's 1,000,001 issues. But the main question, are you looking for issues not to do something? Or are you looking for issues with the mindset that you would like to solve them? Because it's the former. I can speak to that editor at Sputnik, and I can share a lot with them to give you reasons why not to do it. But if it's governments that are serious and want to find a way, we've put it before them. And we've got it legally vetted and supported and even politically supported in that sense.
And having been a diplomat and a former politician, I can see that this kind of reasoning, making Damascus nervous, is an extra reason to move and proceed on this. Any other questions? Also for Catherine and Lubna on screen. So who would have a question? Sarah? I know who you are, but please state who you are also for the people at home.
Yeah, thank you. This is Sarah from the HBS office in Beirut. And talking about making Damascus nervous, I have a question maybe to Ibrahim or Lubna on the arrest warrant, which, if I remember correctly, was issued on November 14th, so right on time before the COP, which Assad was invited to but now did not attend, which would have been his first return or attendance on a world stage if he had went. My question is about the arrest warrant in the sense of, what do you... In terms of making Assad nervous, what does the arrest warrant mean? Or from another direction, what challenges or what needs to happen for the arrest warrant to take full effect to, reach that point, and also in terms of maybe where does the arrest warrant stand in terms of political immunity?
Okay, that's clear. And I I looked at Ibrahim, and I will give this question to Lubna, because Lubna is in France, and I think you were very much involved in this as well. So maybe also explain in a few sentences a little bit of the background on this arrest warrant for people who haven't been following. Lubna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Petra, but I may need also Brahim assist in the legal part. But this case, been working on this case from 2 years. There is, as I mentioned to you, civil parties, SCM mainly, and Syrian Archive, and Open Society Foundation, and the Federation of Human Rights, with a lot of individual and survivors. This case started by a testimony of a dual nationality woman that's been affected by a Syrian that's committed attack committed in Eastern Ghouta on 21 of August 2013. We're still waiting now for arrest warrant to get approved, as I understand from the lawyer, because there is still a chance that the court in France give Bashar al-Assad immunity, diplomatic immunity, and not accept the arrest warrant that get from the investigator judges. So, and this may take around 9 months to get an answer of this. So we're still preparing ourselves to go through these challenges. If you need more information, maybe Brahim can add. But what this arrest warrant means, at least for me, from my personal, of course, understanding to the Syrian regime, I don't think they give any care about it. But maybe the states who have good connection with the French government and French states care about this. And this will put pressure on the Syrian regime. If other states have encouraged to took some same measures, same steps, that may limit the movement, or at least the diplomatic relationships, and or the normalization that's now we are talking about it as a reality. Maybe this will put also a pressure on Bashar al-Assad regime. But unfortunately, we witnessed a dictatorship before, a dictator like Omar al-Bashir, with something maybe a higher, but nothing happened. So I believe there will be still a space for Bashar al-Assad, but this is depend on how much this kind of arrest warrant will affect his allies, like Russia, Iran, Emirates, and all these states. This is my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Lubna. And your line is not always very stable. I'm always worried who is interfering. Probably people who are nervous, so that might be a sign of success as well. Going to Ibrahim, maybe you can add to what Lubna said about the arrest warrant in France against Bashar al-Assad. That sentence on its own is already a really good sentence to say.
Yeah, I think it's very strong. I mean, that's not the typical stuff I'd ask you to Google, but if you Google Bashar al-Assad without putting anything after or before, and you go to news, you will get the arrest warrant nonstop, right? In that sense. And that, for us, is a huge success. After the one prior to that was welcomed back to the Arab League, right? So invited to COP. Those were the headlines, right?
So you changed the narrative.
So the headline changed. The headline completely changed. That's the first thing. The second thing is that this arrest warrant comes after significant investigation. It's not an arrest warrant at an early stage. So therefore, what that means is that the evidence exists, the linkage evidence exists. It's a matter of procedure. So from a strategic perspective, even if the battle, and it is a battle, it's a war, it's a full-on war that we're going to have on the issue of immunities, even if that battle is lost, it will still show that you're hiding behind your immunities It's not the matter of evidence, because immunities can be waived. You know, people can say, I'm giving up my personal immunities. Immunities are owed to the states. So there is a way to kind of say, if you have nothing to hide, waive your immunities. There are ways around it. The third point, even if it's completely lost and you know, we're unable to kind of push forward with it, we would still push the narrative that Bashar al-Assad formerly wanted, but for an immunity kind of thing, right? So in that sense, that would help in setting the scene, setting the narrative, putting the pressure. With COP, so without going into a lot of details, that arrest warrant and previous things caused huge diplomatic problems, not legal problems, because of the family photo. I know from European diplomats that they sent and said, we're not participating in the family photo if Bashar al-Assad is there.
Ooh,
right?
And down went the PR exercise.
Yeah,
it
no,
works.
It works. And some governments had exact protocols for their heads of states where to walk, and they were discussing it with the Emiratis in order to avoid any coincidental picture. Right? So that, regardless of immunities and sovereignty and all of that, in itself, I don't think will go, even if the immunities that doesn't work in that sense. But it's a battle that we're willing to fight in any case.
How family pictures can ruin the party. It's Christmas time, so it fits very well. Last question from the audience before I do a round, first with my friends online and then here, last observation. So who wants to take the last question? The gentleman in the back. Please state your name and your affiliation.
Yes, good evening. My name is Giorgio. I work for the Heinrich-Böll Foundation in the field of foreign and security policy. And I have a question on the legitimacy of the tribunal you try to set up. I understood that it's legal. When you mentioned the Yugoslavia tribunal, I remember that Milosevic from the very beginning said, this is a NATO tribunal. It's Western states who set up an illegitimate tribunal, and also some African dictators who ended up under the ICC and so on, always questioned the legitimacy of the ICC. I assume, but I'm not sure, that among your sympathizers, there might be a preponderance of Western states, but I'm not sure. But what happened if, for example, you are able to set up your tribunal and there is a preponderance of Western states supporting it? Doesn't the Syrians or sympathizers or other people might just say, well, here we go again. It's a Western
tribunal. The question is clear. Thank you, sir.
Yeah,
Thank you.
And what is your take? And maybe even you, Petra, might comment on that. Well, how would you react?
First, Ibrahim.
You're absolutely right. You are absolutely right. And so a couple of things on legitimacy and then on what the work that we're doing. So first of all, legitimacy in the eyes of whom? Who am I trying to convince? The Russians? They call the IIIM the so-called IIIM. It's a General Assembly passed, sorry, Catherine, it's a General Assembly passed resolution, right? That has the vote. They don't recognize it. The IIT of the OPCW, they call it the so-called IIT. So the first question is legitimacy in the eyes of whom? The second question, let's say in the middle ground or the wider community. From discussions even with governments, we have seen that there are multiple sources of legitimacy. So first of all, who's calling for it, right? And here, that's one of the reasons why we went public, that you have Syrians, survivors and victims, and first responders and others calling for it. The second point is that there's so many Security Council resolutions, there's 3 of them, that say absolutely determined to hold all perpetrators to account for the use of chemical weapons. And you have about 8 General Assembly resolutions, which means the entire world has said that, that mention accountability specifically. They're all listed on the website, right? So you have political coverage in terms of legitimacy on this. Then it is legitimacy that it's on chemical weapons. And the issue here is that there's no whataboutery and whataboutism that other courts might have difficulties with in that sense. It's a very old, well-established norm and so on, right? So all these factors contribute to the idea, we're acting upon Security Council Resolution X, General Assembly Resolution Y, responding to what victims are saying, acting in our sovereign capacity. You can see I've drafted the ministerial statements. That's exactly the line. But then I will personally pull the plug if it becomes a Western initiative, because I think that will destroy it. And so our role has been part of our role is speaking to countries we've never spoken to before. In the African bloc, in Latin Americans, in Asians, we were speaking to them. It was new to us, it was new to them. They were very confused as to why I'm speaking to them, right, on this. Because it's either the international organization or it's the other diplomat, but I kind of come to someone who's affected by the matter, advocating with them in that sense. Because then the whole, what about Iraq, what about Afghanistan, doesn't work with me. Right? And, you know, and they're like, yeah, but the global north, yeah, global south power, you know, whatever works in those meetings. But it's absolutely true. And we have been doing it. So for us, a big part of legitimacy is having at least the working group, 1 or 2 countries from across the world. It will, we personally care that we have the leading Western countries that care about this, 1 or 2 of them, but the rest is equally distributed. And it's a hard conversation, it's a difficult conversation, but actually there is a conversation. I'm being invited to capitals to meet vice ministers in Latin America. I never imagined that before, neither did they. But the idea is that that's absolutely a source of legitimacy. And if more countries want to join, that's up to them in that sense. But again, we need to distinguish legitimacy in the eyes of whom, and what sort of legitimacy do I need at the setup stage versus later. So, would some people say Nuremberg was illegitimately created? Some might argue that. But then some of the work that it has done may have contributed to the legitimacy later, and so on. Again, countries not looking for an excuse not to do it will find some excuses, but countries looking for where they can get legitimacy from, it's a huge menu of options.
I think I read in an interview with you somewhere, and that would be my very brief answer. This is not victor's justice, but victim's justice. And I think that makes it very strong with many countries. And if you're looking for a coalition, I think the coalition of countries that are propagating, that are in favor of feminist foreign policy, it's also much broader than just a few Northern European. You know, Colombia is on board, Mexico is on board, because it has a transformational energy behind it. Well, I mean, we have to have another evening on feminist foreign policy and patriarchy, but obviously rockets and chemical weapons, there is a lot of domination there. That's another topic. I'm going to our friends online, Catherine and Lubna, for your last closing statement. What is your takeaway of tonight? Or any recommendation for the people in the audience, online, offline, politicians, diplomats, journalists watching? 1, 2 sentences, please. Catherine, first.
So, yes, happy to do it, and to leave the last word to Lubna. For me, I just want to come back for a second on this case that we've been talking about in France, just to say the investigation is ongoing. It's one of the few investigations of chemical weapons that we've been asked to support, that I'm allowed to say that we support it and will continue to support. Other panelists have spoken about the immunity issue and the battle that is probably going to take place around that, but there are also other senior Syrian officials in that case that are subject of the arrest warrant. And again, it's one of the rare instances of justice for victims and survivors of those horrific crimes, and we can't. We need those. We need more of those, and we need those. We owe it to the victims and survivors, and that's with that I want to end.
Thank you, Catherine. Lubna?
Thank you, Petra. What I want to say that no one on this earth must experience chemical attack. No one, and this must be something all of us care about. It's not just for Syrian or some kind of nation. No, this is something all humanity should care about, that this weapon must be prohibited. No one should experience chemical weapon. The second thing I want to remind of, that all this happening because we still have Bashar al-Assad and his regime in authority. We need political process and solution combined with accountability. Everything will be stuck unless we start to think also on the political dimension and this is also need a political will, international political will. Thank you.
Thank you. Ibrahim? 1-2 sentences?
Yeah, perhaps on the role of Germany, just so you know, all the taxpayers in the audience can do something. I hope you're paying your taxes. This issue is obviously involves multiple departments, and I can say that, you know, with some departments who have had great allies and great support within the German foreign ministry, but there are still some departments that would I think benefit from some push in that sense. I won't name them. I don't think that's appropriate. Do see me a bit later if you wanna know where exactly you can have your impact. But I think Germany is a leader on those issues, and Germany should not take a back seat when it comes to these matters. It had pushed, has, you know, your ambassadors, your diplomats everywhere are doing a fantastic job. And I think on this, because we've been engaging Germany from very on, including a huge amount of other countries, but Germany is one that we've been engaging from the very beginning. We have seen allies within the system who are willing to take this forward, and some who are making it a little bit more difficult. So please identify the allies and really help them in that sense. We really count on your support. Now is this slide, we've put the proposal forward. Now it's for you to take it to the next steps and help us take it to the next steps.
Become political. That's your call. Bente?
Well, I think for me, I also had a chance to chat with Ibrahim before, and for me it was really encouraging to see how much resonance there is from Africa, from states that I also never had on my agenda for thinking about a joint project like this. So I think it's really encouraging, and I hope it will go forward. I think justice matters. Justice matters politically, but also socially, for healing, as Lubna said. And I think really, if we look back, the Halabja massacre is a stain on our collective memory. And there are so many other things that went with impunity. And I think really, it's never too late to start. So I find it really promising to see this initiative. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I would like to thank everybody at home for being with us online, for Lubna and Catherine being with us online, Ibrahim and Bente. And let me say one thing. People didn't believe me when I spoke up for the Syrians in the streets of the cities and villages of Syria, speaking up for freedom, dignity, justice. And there was so much oxygen in the air, oxygen of freedom. And it was clear with these chemical attacks that the Bashar al-Assad regime and also later on some of the groups tried to suffocate, literally, the Syrians asking for freedom. And this evening, I think, has brought some oxygen back into the fight for against impunity and the fight for justice. And let's use that oxygen to be political, to work in your media, to work in your legal departments, because it is a collective effort, and we will bring justice to the survivors and victims of these horrible attacks. And I'm very happy if this event and this initiative will make people nervous in Damascus. That is also part of this success. Please, a warm applause for everybody who participated in front of the screen and also the amazing team who facilitated behind the scene. Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Lubna. Have a nice evening. And actually, there are drinks, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, with oxygen.
Thank you.